and welcome to this tutorial video on Afterthought heels for socks. Afterthought heels can be used on toe-up socks or on cuff-down socks, but it's more conventional for toe-up socks. Afterthought heels can be worked with or without scrap yarn. If you don't use scrap yarn, it's called a true Afterthought heel, and you will basically cut in the fabric where you want the heel to be. First, I'm going to show you how to do an Afterthought heel with scrap yarn. This scrap yarn does not have to be sock yarn, but it does have to be of a similar weight, so a similar thickness, and it needs to stand out. So I chose white because that would stand out for this sock yarn. The benefit of using scrap yarn for Afterthought heels is that it's slightly less intimidating, so it's great to start with scrap yarn. For a true Afterthought heel, where you cut into the fabric after completing a tube of sock, actually, that would be the benefits of that is that you can just continue on knitting until you basically have a completed sock. And that's really nice if you want car knitting or cinema knitting, or, you know, just plain knitting without any heel stuff. With a true Afterthought heel, you can try on the tube as is and then figure out where you want the heel to be put. If you're doing an Afterthought heel with scrap yarn, you actually need to determine it beforehand. So you need to measure where you want your heel to be put and then put in the scrap yarn. If you're not sure where to put in the heel, take a look at my sock pattern. It will be linked in the description box below. Usually it is the length of the foot minus 5 centimeters or 2 inches. What I really like about Afterthought heels is that with striping yarn, it creates a really nice effect. If I were to do a German shorter heel or another shorter heel with this yarn, you would have the striping would not continue like this. And with Afterthought heels, you can just create a really fun striping pattern on the heel. So I've knit up my sock until where I want the heel to be put in. I'm doing this on DPNs, which is double pointed needles. I will also show you this in circular needles in a few minutes. Now you only need to determine what is the top part or the top half of your sock, and that's just as easy as picking your favorite side. So I'm actually okay with this being the bottom side, because where you're gonna put in the scrap yarn, that's gonna have the heel on it, so that's gonna be the sole part of your foot. Okay, so I'm just gonna take my scrap yarn and I'm gonna knit one row, so one needle I mean, all the way across with this scrap yarn. Just would recommend to use a smooth scrap yarn, so nothing like mohair, so because you need to be able to really see the stitches on either side of it, so choose a non-fuzzy yarn for that. Now I've come to the end of this needle with the scrap yarn, and what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to continue knitting the sock. So I'm gonna start at this side again with my main color sock yarn. I'm gonna knit all the way across the scrap yarn. I knit all the way across again with my main color sock yarn. As you can see, the scrap yarn is standing out really well from the main color sock yarn, so I'll have no issues at all locating my scrap yarn when I want to put in the heel. So what you're gonna do now is you're just gonna continue with knitting the leg of the sock and then a cuff, And if you don't really know how long to make the sock, actually the heel is the middle point and the leg needs to be, well, at least as long as the foot. So that's my standard measurement for a, medium height sock. If you want ankle socks, of course you can stop earlier, that's no problem at all. But usually I would fold the tube flat and see how long I have to go. If the leg comes up to about here, I usually start the cuff and then go on to knit for this much, or maybe even some more. So go ahead and do that and meet me back when you have completed the tube of sock, and then I'll show you how to put in the Afterthought heel. Now I'm going to show you how to do that exact same thing on circular needles. So I'm at the point where I want to put in my heel. I've determined that this is the side that I want to put the heel in. So this is going to be the sole of the foot. I've got my scrap yarn. And now I will knit across this needle with the scrap yarn. And usually, even when I'm knitting the sock on a circular needle, I like to do this one needle with a double pointed needle. And I'm going to show you why in just a minute. So I'm going to knit across with the scrap yarn. Just as I normally would knit. I've knit across this needle with the scrap yarn, and I want to knit across this needle again with the working yarn, which is the main color. And so what I need to do is I need to transfer all of these stitches back onto the left needle so that I can start knitting again from here. And that is why I prefer to use a double pointed needle for the step I had just done, just so that I still have my right needle here and I can knit across the double pointed needle again. So because I haven't done that now, so just in case you don't have a double pointed needle, I will show you how to do it on a circular needle. You just have to transfer all of the stitches back onto the left needle. It doesn't matter if you're twisting it, because we're not gonna leave this scrap yarn in anyway. So we're just gonna transfer them from the right needle to the left needle. Now I've transferred all of the stitches back into the left needle. So now I can continue with my sock and knit the leg, and I will knit across again with the main color. I've knit across the scrap yarn again with the working yarn, and I'm just going to continue with the working yarn and finish the leg portion. And after you've done that, and feel free to use my other instruction videos for the cuff and for the bind off. And after you've done that, come meet me back in this video where I will show you how to pick up the stitches for the heel. Alright, welcome back. First, I apologize for the harsh lighting, but I had to put a light on because it was just too dark in here. As you can see, I have finished one sock with the scrap yarn and one sock without the scrap yarn. And I'm going to show you how to pick up the stitches, remove the scrap yarn for this one, and continue with knitting the heel. I'm going to do that for this one with double pointed needles or DPNs, and I'm going to do that for the true Afterthought heel with circular needles. I'm going to do this one first Then I'm going to show you how to do that on circular needles. And then I'm gonna put in another segment on how to do a Kitchener stitch at the end of your heel. And please look at the description box for any timestamps. So if you want to skip ahead, please do. I'm gonna start with picking up the stitches around the scrap yarn here. So if you can see, so here's the scrap yarn. It's the white line of stitches, and it's just on this side as we didn't put it in on the front. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna pick up all of the stitches above and all of the stitches underneath that white line. So, and I like to insert one hand into the sock for that, so I can feel the needle on the inside of the sock. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna pick up the stitches through the right leg. See, I'm gonna zoom in a little bit more. So here's the first white stitch. So I'm not gonna pick up anything here, otherwise we'll have too many stitches. We can do that later to close any gaps if necessary. I'm gonna go in above through the right leg, and I'm gonna do that for every stitch. So I'm gonna do that here, just for every stitch on top of that white line. Almost at the end here. I have 3 more stitches to pick up. There. Gonna place those stitches in the middle. Gonna take my second DPN and I'm gonna do the same, but I want to do that with the stitches underneath. Here the right leg is kind of hidden. If you have any difficulties with picking up the right leg, it's not a problem if you pick up the left leg at all. So it just, keeping it consistent makes it easy for me not to skip any stitches, because you don't want any stitches dropping. So I'm just gonna stick with the right leg and pick up all of those along the bottom side. And as we're working with DPNs, when I've come halfway, I'm gonna switch and take my third DPN to finish. So that's right about now. So it's gonna get a little fiddly as I have to see around the second DPN. Once I pick up a few stitches here, I can move this so the stitches are secure. It's getting a little bit difficult to show you this right now. So now I've picked up every stitch all around the scrap yarn, and what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna take a needle. You can do this with your fourth DPN if you like, get that scrap yarn out by pulling on the edge stitch and then pulling it all the way off of these stitches. You can cut the scrap yarn while you're doing this, so it gets easier to pull it out. I've removed all of the scrap yarn from this part of the sock, and as you can see, we have a nice little gap right here. Gonna attach my yarn for the heel right now. You can start on either side, it doesn't matter. So I'm gonna just attach my yarn right here, leaving a bit of extra length for sewing up later, because there might be some gaps I need to close, and I like to have a little bit of extra yarn for that. So now I'm just gonna knit until I get to the other end and see which stitches I can pick up, so I can already close the gap a little bit. So I've come to the other side, and as you can see, there is quite a large gap right here. So I'm gonna pick up at least 2 stitches to knit into the round, and we can decrease those as we go along. So I usually like to go in this row and pick up the bars in between the stitches like this. So I'm gonna use that one, and here, one more over there. And I'm gonna knit one onto the needle I've just completed, and the other one I'm gonna place onto the next needle and then knit. And I'm gonna finish this entire needle. Now, as you can see, there's another gap on this side. Also, this stitch is a little bit wide, but what I'm gonna do to close the gap and pull this a little bit tight is I'm gonna see where this one leads to and pick up, let me see, pick up this bar. See, that leads to this stitch. So I'm gonna use this one and one over here. Let's do this one. So I'm gonna put the second one onto the next needle, and this one I'm gonna knit onto the one we just completed. And as this stitch is a little bit loose, I'm gonna knit it twisted, because usually here this is the right leg, but if I would knit through that, it would create a large hole. So I'm gonna knit it through the left leg, as that also tightens it up a little bit more. We have completed one row, or one round I should say, of plain knit stitch, and we've picked up stitches on either side of the heel. And if you like a bit more room in your heel, you can knit plain for 2 more rounds tops, but then you're gonna need to start decreasing. So I'm gonna do 1 decrease round to show you, and you're gonna just alternate plain knit rounds and decrease rounds. If you've ever knit socks cuff down, then this is also basically the same way as to decrease for a toe. Gonna first knit the stitch that I just picked up from the gap. I'm just gonna knit one, and then I'm gonna slip, slip, knit. And you can do that slip, slip, knit like this, or if you want to do it a little bit quicker, you can just omit the slipping of the 2 stitches and just knit them together through the back loop. That's a little bit quicker. This is getting a little bit stretched out because that's where the begin strand is, so don't freak out if that happens. We'll close it up later. Now we're gonna knit onto the other side of the heel. So we're gonna knit the entirety of this needle, knit onto the next needle, just as if these two are one needle. I'm not gonna do anything at the beginning of this one. And then we're gonna knit until there's 3 stitches left. See, there's 3 stitches left, and here we're just gonna knit 2 together and knit 1. So you're gonna leave 1 stitch plain on each side. So here again, we're gonna just knit 1, and then we're gonna start decreasing. So I'm just gonna knit 2 through the back loop again, or slip, slip, knit, whatever you want to do, until 3 stitches are left. Knit 2 together and knit 1. Completed 1 decrease round. You're gonna alternate plain knit rounds, so knitting without picking up or decreasing any stitches. Just plain knitting for 1 round and then decreasing for 1 round. And you're gonna continue to do that until you have 10 stitches left on each side. So you'll have 10 stitches here and 5 on each of these needles. Or this is the standard number I use, but for example, if you've used 8 stitches on each side for the toe, or 12 stitches on each side for the toe, make sure you use that same number so the heel or toe won't be any pointier than the other. So keep the number of stitches the same as you used for the toe. So I will show you how to do this exact same thing on circular needles, and after that I'm going to come back and show you how to close those final 10 stitches on each side with Kitchener stitch. So if you're interested in that, be sure to check the description box and skip ahead to that section. Okay, so now I'm going to show you how to do a true afterthought heel. So that's opening a gap for the heel without any scrap yarn. So I went ahead and measured where I want the exact placement of the heel. I've done that by putting in a marker, and as I have done for the sock with the scrap yarn, I'm gonna pick up stitches along this row and along the bottom of that row. I'm going to use my circular needle for that. For this version without scrap yarn, we're going to pick up stitches and then make sure we have 30 stitches or whatever amount you use on either side of the heel. So if you use 64 stitches, then you want to divide that by half, so 32 stitches, and you're going to want to pick up 32 stitches for your heel. And this for this sock I used 60 stitches in the round, so I'm going to pick up 30 stitches for the heel. And as we don't have any scrap yarn, we're not quite sure where to start, if I need to pick up this stitch or if I need to start with picking up this stitch. I'm gonna pick up the stitch closest to the edge and then count later if we have the right amount of stitches. So as I did previously, I'm gonna pick up every right leg. And I apologize if it is difficult to see on this color yarn. So you're gonna pick up every right leg and make sure you're working in the same row of stitches. So you're not picking up one stitch below or one stitch on top. You just need to work in the same row, and you know, that's the scrap yarn is a really handy guideline for that. So that's one of the reasons why a true afterthought heel is not for beginners, beginner knitters. But you know, once you get the hang of it, it's actually quite easy. So I'm gonna just pick up stitches until I reach the other edge. Oops, skip one there. And I'm gonna count all of these. And I hope there are 30 stitches on here. Yeah, so I have my 30 stitches. If I didn't have my 30 stitches, I would see which side is a little bit off, because you can measure that by also looking at the toe, because of course the toe marks the sides. You don't want to have a skew heel. So, but now I have picked up 30 stitches, so it's all fine. Now I'm gonna take the second point of my needle. I'm just gonna flip over this marker, and I'm gonna pick up stitches below the marker now. So now I know where to start. It's 2 stitches below this needle, so I'm gonna skip this stitch because this is the row we want to remove, we want to cut away. And then I'm gonna start with picking up stitches below. And for this side, it's actually easier to see which stitch you need to pick up, so so you stay in the same row. You can just look at the stitch you picked up for the top side. You can count down 2 stitches from that and know which one to pick up. Okay, now just to be sure, I'm gonna count these stitches too. Okay, that's also 30 stitches. So I'm gonna remove my marker now. And now comes the exciting part, as I'm gonna cut away. I'm gonna cut into 1 stitch in the middle there. So make sure you don't cut at the edge, because then you don't have enough yarn to weave in. So if you cut here right in the middle, see, so let's pick this stitch. Make sure you're not cutting any stitches from the other side of the sock. Just cut. And then I'm gonna tug a little bit, and then we're gonna unravel at the sides until we reach the edge, or the first stitch we have picked up. And before, with the scrap yarn, if the unraveling got a little bit difficult, you could just cut the scrap yarn and tug at it again, so it would be easier to remove. But now you don't want to do that, because then you would have less yarn to weave in and secure those edge stitches. And it's actually quite easy to unravel, so don't worry about that. Okay, so do I need to unravel this? Yes, just this one more. Okay. Oh, and also, yes, okay. So now I unraveled it all the way to the edge, and I will just tug that strand in to the inside of the sock, and we can use it to weave in. We can weave it in later and close any gaps with it. I'm gonna do the same thing on the other side. Okay, so as you can see, we have cut the yarn and I have unraveled it all the way to both edges. So now there's a nice gap to put in your heel. I'm gonna take my yarn that I want to use for the heel, and I'm gonna start knitting on this side, knitting across. Then I'm gonna pick up stitches here on this side of the heel. I'm gonna work across here, and then I'm gonna pick up stitches on this side of the heel. So we're at this side now, and we're gonna pick up 2 stitches. Actually gonna use this needle, it doesn't really matter. And as you can see, this stitch is very loose, so I am gonna try to pick up the stitch or a strand that leads to that. No, this leads to there, so this one leads to here. See how that closes up? Then I'm gonna pick up this one. And so the second stitch I'm gonna slip on the next needle, and this stitch I'm just gonna knit and pull the needle through so that stays on this side. And that's helpful to, you know, so you don't have a skew heel. Also gonna knit this stitch. That's a little bit loose. I'm just gonna knit that twisted. I'm gonna knit to the other side and also pick up some stitches there. So I'm at the other side now. I'm also gonna pick up 2 stitches here. So I'm really diving in between the stitches and see if there's a bar I can pick up there, to, you know, not create any large gaps. Gonna slip the second stitch on the next needle, and I'm gonna knit this. I'm gonna want to twist that as well. So I'm just gonna slip it on here, knit it, twist it, and then I'm gonna slide the needle through the stitch so that it remains on the other side. Was one plain knit round. Now we're going to do a decrease round. As I mentioned for the other sock, if you'd like a roomier heel, you can add 2 more plain knit rows rounds here. You start decreasing, and you can alternate plain and decrease knit rounds. So we're gonna do a decrease knit round here. I'm gonna just knit the first stitch. Might want to knit that one twisted as well. And then I'm gonna decrease. Now on this side, you're gonna want to slip, oops. So slip, slip, knit. But actually my favorite way, just to make it a little bit quicker, is just to knit two together through the back loop. So without any slipping. Doesn't really matter which one you do. The slip, slip, knit looks a little bit neater, but this one is a little bit quicker. So just wanted to show you that option. Until you have 3 stitches left on this needle, you're gonna knit 2 stitches together and knit 1. We're gonna turn, switch to the other needle, and we're gonna do the exact same thing as with the other needle. So we're gonna knit 1, knit 2 together through the back loop, or slip slip knit, whatever is your preferred method, and knit until you have 3 stitches left. 3 stitches left. I'm gonna knit 2 together and knit that last stitch. One decrease round. So now you're gonna alternate plain knit rounds without any decreasing and decrease rounds. You have an exact number of stitches left on each needle. I use 10 stitches on each side as a standard, but for example, if you've cast on 8 stitches on each side for the toe, then also knit until you have 8 stitches on each side here. If you use 12 stitches on each side for the toe, then knit until you have 12 stitches on each side here. Just use the same number as you use for the toe. So I'm gonna go ahead and work until that point, and then come meet me back here. Instructions on how to do the Kitchener stitch to close the heel. Now I repeated those 2 rows until I have 10 stitches left on each side. So I alternated plain knit and also decrease rows. And now I have 5 stitches left on each of these needles and 10 stitches on this needle. And now we're gonna Kitchener the stitches together so the heel is nice and closed up. And I'm going to transfer these stitches onto just 1 needle, because that makes it easier. So I'm just gonna transfer them without twisting any of them. So I still have 2 needles left. And actually this part would be the same as for circular needles, just make sure the tips are on the side of the yarn. Now we're gonna break the yarn, but we're gonna make sure we have enough. So I'll just, I don't know, about 1/2 meter or so. I'm using a darning needle that is not super pointy, that's a little bit blunt, as it's nice for Kitchener stitching because it's not sharp enough that it splits the yarn. Most tutorials for Kitchener stitching use some kind of setup instructions to set up the stitches correctly for the Kitchener stitching, but I'm just skipping that because it looks fine without the setup instructions and it's easier to remember. So what we're gonna do is knit off, purl on, purl off, knit on. And I'm gonna show you what that means. So I'm gonna zoom in a little bit and I'm gonna hold the needles like this. So I'm holding it apart a little bit. I'm inserting my needle, I've threaded it with the yarn, I'm inserting it into the first stitch as if to knit, pulling it through, and we can slide that stitch off. Now I'm gonna insert my needle as if to purl through the next stitch, and we're gonna leave it on. So we did a knit off, purl on, and now we're gonna go to the opposite needle, and I'm gonna purl off. So insert as if to purl, lift that stitch off the needle. Make sure that when you're pulling your yarn that it doesn't twist around the bottom needle, just it needs to go underneath. So we did a purl off. Now we're gonna do a knit on. So insert as if to knit, thread all the way through, I'll leave the stitch on. And we're gonna just repeat that, and you don't have to tug it tight after every stitch. We're gonna make sure it looks nice when we've completed this. So knit off, I'm just gonna insert and do the next step before I thread the yarn. So purl on, I'm gonna thread it all the way through now. Purl off, knit on. I'm gonna do this, see, 2 steps one time and then threading it through when I'm done with that. Another knit off, purl on, threading it through. Make sure that yarn doesn't get caught on top of the needle. Purl off, knit on. And just repeat until you have just 2 stitches left. Okay, I'm almost done now. And before I finish these stitches, I want to give you a little tip on keeping track of where you are. Say you are distracted for a moment, somebody's talking to you, and you look back at your work and you don't know what your next step is. Well, just keep in mind that every stitch has to be woven through twice. So I can see my yarn is here right now, and I've woven through this stitch only once. And let's see, at the other stitch, there's also just 1 strand of yarn going through there. So now I've completed my, see the direction the yarn is going? I've completed my purl on here. So now I'm just gonna go and purl this one off, knit on, and that's how you can see where you are and what your next step is. So here I'm gonna knit off, purl on, and actually that last stitch you only have to go through it once. So I'm gonna slide that off the needle as well. And now purl off, and usually what would be a knit on, I'm also gonna knit off. Okay, so now we have threaded our yarn through all of the stitches, and you can see that it's kind of gappy. See that? And I'm gonna unthread this needle, and we are going to pull those stitches tight, very carefully, starting at the other end. So and the stitches are very loose, so I'm just gonna tug one, then tug the next one. Don't make it too tight. Just basically that it looks like a regular knit stitch. Ideally, you wouldn't see any difference between a regular knit stitch and a Kitchener stitch, so you can kind of gauge it off of that. So you're gonna have a bigger loop as you go. It's gonna get bigger and bigger. Just move it out of the way. And now I can tug on the yarn end to close the last stitch. And this end, I'm gonna weave it in to the inside of the sock. Let me just show you that. Threading the needle again. Going with my hand to the inside, and then just see how this stitch would want to lie. So if you're threading it like this, you're gonna have this loop. Don't know if you can see that. You're gonna have this loop that's kind of wiggling about. So you're gonna want to thread the yarn so that that loop is caught. See? So we're gonna thread it backwards, right about here. Not too tight. That is how you catch that loop so that it lays flat. And if you're interested in seeing how I weave in ends on my socks, be sure to visit my bonus video on that. It's called How to Weave in Ends on Socks. And that concludes my tutorial for the Afterthought heel. I hope you can use it, and if you like this tutorial, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe, or take a look at my other videos, and I hope to see you there again next time. Bye!